Hello, Bronwyn Parkin here. I want to talk about figurative language, something that we discuss in Chapter 6 of Teaching with Intent 3. In the book, we explain that imagery is the overarching umbrella term to talk about the techniques that authors use to create a story world with words. And figurative language is one part of that. So they also use literal techniques. Figurative language is more complicated. Figurative language is about, when we're talking about similes, metaphors, and analogies, and they're harder for the reader, particularly for children who have not a great experience of reading literature, because the author is reaching out to other worlds to make the comparisons and help build the pictures in our heads. And of course, that means they're assuming that the reader knows those other worlds, and so that this is going to be a helpful comparison. So this takes some work by teachers, because we cannot assume that all the students in our class are going to understand the worlds to which these figurative techniques are referring. A simile is probably the easiest to understand, because they're all circumstances or phrases that start with like or as, and they're comparing a character in the book to or a feature of a character in the book to something outside of the book. There are some lovely examples from Colin Teely's Storm Boy. There's a passage in the book where he is describing these wonderful collections of saltwater birds who are in the Coorong where Storm Boy is walking. And here's some examples of similes. The pelicans sat in a row like a lot of important old men with their heavy paunches sagging. So that like obviously is going to be simile, and we can just picture those pelicans all standing up there. And then we get the ibises cut the air into strips. Now that's metaphor, isn't it? Because the air is not actually cut into strips, but it helps us understand how the ibises are moving their curved beaks up and down. And then we get the blue crane stood in silent dignity like a tall, thin statue. So there we get three similes to help build this picture of the seabirds gathering together. Metaphor we describe in the book as morphing the characters from this book with the story world of another book. And that is much more complicated for our young readers to understand if they're not used to it. Because suddenly these weird characters or weird objects appear in the book that don't seem to have anything to do with the story. There's a lovely passage in Paul Jennings' Nails, a passage that works really well with maturing boys. In this book, Layman has actually had to rescue his father from the sea. His father has died being bashed against the bricks, so it's against the rocks. And Layman has to drag him up the hill, and now he is burying him. He is now left on the island alone. And it starts, Layman knew that his father was dead. Silent tears trickled down his cheeks and splashed on the nails that covered his chest. He's actually got what he thinks is fingernails growing over him. Now here's the simile. He sat there like a sorrowful knight of old. So we know we can just imagine him with the sun shining on all of these nails, and he looks like a knight covered in armor. And then there's a pause, and then Paul Jennings says, a warrior in a coat of mail. Now he's left out the words he was, but he just said a warrior in a coat of mail. So suddenly we've got a warrior covered in mail appearing on this island. Now what Paul Jennings is trying to build is this visual picture of Layman covered with the sun shining on him. But you can imagine that some students will be completely discombobulated by this reference. And finally, we come to analogy. Analogies are much less frequent in the books we went searching for anyway. But an analogy is actually easier for readers because it takes a simile or a metaphor and then it elaborates on it. It tells us why the author thinks that there is a relationship or similarity between the character we're talking about and some other feature. One example comes from Evie and Rhino. Now, Evie is talking about the house in which she lives, but the way she describes it is analogous. And it actually turns the house into a character because it's an example of personification. And it goes like this: Luna House is not just any house, it's a living, breathing being. So it is a living, breathing being, not like a living, breathing being, it is one. And then, luckily, Nerida McMullen goes on to explain why it's a living, breathing being, why Evie sees it like this. Evie feels every creak and groan and sigh as an embrace. It shudders and rattles in winter, but she feels it talking to her, reassuring her and reminding her. So all of these elaborations are helping us to understand why this house is wrapping around her and making her feel safe. So 3 examples, 3 techniques: simile, metaphor, and analogy, which are really useful in sophisticated writing for developing characters.